Hey folks, this is Abel James, and thanks so much for joining us on Fat Burning Man, where we talk about real food and real results. Can praying over your food change the way you eat? Can plant medicine like Ayahuasca, San Pedro cactus, or even tobacco help reverse terminal disease? In the heart of the Amazon, alternative medicine healing ceremonies can produce baffling and sometimes miraculous results, even for skeptics like me. Allison and I got a hearty dose of mojo when we spent 2 weeks in plant medicine ceremonies last year down in Peru. And on this week's show, our guest will change the way you think about plants. Nick Polizzi is the director of the documentary The Sacred Science. His work explores holistic alternatives to conventional medicine. The Sacred Science follows a group of terminally ill patients searching for healing deep in the Amazon jungle. Before we get there, I'd like to share a few success stories that just came in. This first one is from Debbie, which cracked me up. She says, "Wow, did you know that an elephant's head weighs 44 pounds and a bushel of oranges weighs 45 pounds? Yeah, I'm almost there. Today marks 43 pounds gone just from changing the way I eat." Thank you, Abel and Allison. You inspire so many. Thank you, Debbie. This next one is from Kayla, who's just getting started living wild. She says, "So I started eating wild about 2.5 weeks ago. I really like it and I feel good. I wasn't sure everything I was doing was right, and I'm still not sure. However, I hopped on the scale for fun just now, and I'm down 11 pounds. Kind of exciting and just wanted to share. Note, I live in a very rural area, so not everything I eat can be organic, etc., but that's okay. I just make the good choices I can." Kayla, that's a really great point. Number one, congratulations. Number two, as someone who was raised in a very rural place, and also, we lived in the Smoky Mountains for around 6 months this past year, I understand it's not always easy or convenient or practical to get 100% organic. So we do the best we can, and it's also important to note that there's certified organic, which is great, and you can usually find that in big box and chain stores and certainly health food stores. But if you're buying local and you're going to your neighbors to buy your food, a lot of times it will be practically organic, but they won't be able to afford the certification process, which can be really expensive, especially for small farms. My brother's an organic farmer. I bring this up because you can usually get the non-certified organic and the clean, real food for a lot cheaper than you would buying organic in those big Whole Foods type stores. And most of the time, if you do a little bit of looking around, or especially if you go to your local farmer's market, you can find great food for a lot less than you'd spend buying organic food in a Whole Foods or something like that. So something to keep in mind. This doesn't have to be expensive. You can definitely find ways to do it for less, and we're here to help you do that. So this next one is from Nikki. Nikki says, "What a difference 56 pounds makes. I'm loving how I feel and look, buying clothes that I actually like and want, not just because they fit. I got my target and I have just under 6 pounds to go. I will not fail. It's a way of life and not a diet." You're totally right about that lifestyle part, Nikki. Congratulations, and we're here for you. Now, if you're out there and you want to share your story, don't be shy. Find me under Abel James or Fat Burning Man on social media, and of course in the Fat Burning Tribe. And by the way, our new seasonal 30-day meal plans in the Fat Burning Tribe are ready. We're talking bacon burgers, Persian kebabs, pumpkin fudge cakes, lemon curd tartlets, and even a bit of chocolate. I can tell you firsthand, we've had a lot of fun coming up with some of these recipes and certainly taste testing them over the past few weeks. This is the best job ever, obviously. We're just about to announce, though, the winners of our 7-day sugar-free detox challenge. So if you haven't joined one of our challenges yet, you're totally missing out. It's awesome. Come join us in the Fat Burning Tribe. When you join, you'll get a new set of 30-day wild meal plans every month, which are normally $47, but you get them on the house with your membership. You'll never have to worry about what you're cooking for dinner again. And if you're ready to start eating delicious food and shedding stubborn fat, check out the Fat Burning Tribe yourself for a limited time discount at fatburningtribe.com. Once again, from any device, including the one you're listening on right now, just type in fatburningtribe.com and I'll meet you in the members area. And if you're already a member, I can't say exactly what we're releasing soon, but you're going to be really happy about it. It's a special surprise, so stay tuned for that. And if you haven't joined us already, come check out the Fat Burning Tribe. You're going to love it, and I'd love to meet you on the inside. All right, on this episode of Fat Burning Man with Nick Polizzi, you'll learn how to heal your body, mind, and soul with plant medicine, why connectedness is an important part of health, the incredible power of ritual and ceremony, how not to fall off a cliff in Peru, and much more. Let's go hang out with Nick. All right, folks, Nick Polizzi has spent his career directing documentaries about holistic alternatives to conventional medicine. Nick's work stems from a calling to honor, preserve, and protect the ancient knowledge and rituals of the indigenous peoples of this world. He just returned from Peru, one of my favorite places in the world, although I hear he almost fell off a cliff. Nick, number one, I'm so glad you're alive. Number two, thanks so much for joining us.
Oh man, it's an absolute pleasure. It's fun every time I go down to Peru. There's always an adventure. It seems like the people I hang out with like to push it to the limit.
Doesn't surprise me.
Coming back here in one piece is always a good thing. But yeah, it's an honor to be on the show.
So how did a gringo from Connecticut find himself in the Amazon jungle? Not just once, but a number of times.
I made a few movies before this most recent one, The Sacred Science, and they were about other facets of alternative medicine. And as we were sort of interviewing all the experts, for those movies, I would ask them, hey, who are your teachers? Who are your mentors? And just way too many of them were saying, oh, well, actually, you don't know my mentor. He's an indigenous fellow or an indigenous woman from this tribe that is really taking my spirituality and my physical health to the next level. I'm like, wait a second. So who are all these people? And so I started kind of sniffing around and, following the breadcrumbs like any good documentarian I think probably would do. And it all kind of led me into shamanism. And, one of the main hubs of shamanism in this world is South America and the Amazon. Right. So, I went from being somebody who was just kind of filming things about meridian points and tapping for stress to all of a sudden I'm in the middle of the jungle filming these indigenous folks who have these traditions that are, hundreds and thousands of years old and, very endangered, but extremely effective.
So it's an entirely different world, and they think about what humans are in a different way down there. What was the biggest thing that surprised you when you come from the Western world? Like you said, you're doing the tapping and other things that are kind of in alternative medicine, but it's a whole other thing down there. What surprised you?
I think that the conversation around our own mortality was something that I had never really seen. First of all, it had never really been something that was talked about in my house growing up.
Sure.
And it was something that I didn't really see in the conversation that was happening around holistic health, alternative medicine, or medicine, period. I think it's something that is largely avoided at all costs in the conversation in the Western world. We don't talk about our own mortality. We don't talk about what might happen after that. We don't talk about who the heck we actually are.
Right.
Who's behind, one of my shamans always says, who's seeing through those eyes, who's hearing through those ears, like who is in there, and so that there was this, they weren't willing to just be like, oh, so you just rub this on your skin or you tap this point and it goes away. They're like, if you want to work with these technologies, you want to like understand, first of all, if you want us to trust you, period, and let you film us, we need to see you a little bit. So we're going to be asking you questions and putting you through some ceremonies that'll hopefully peel the onion layers away and not only let us see you, but let you see yourself. So that was a big like, eye opener. It was a point of fear for some time because I was seeing a lot of things and trying to understand things that I had never really acknowledged about myself. So there was that whole kind of who is the essence of who you are, which seems like it might be kind of like a nice sort of a nice sentiment or a nice sort of like a term that we might all use in like love letters and things like that. Oh, who is the essence of who I am? But who exactly is the essence of who you are? And when you start looking at that in real terms, it can be shocking. It can be a little intimidating, but it's definitely, in my experience, the fastest way to creating healing results, whether that's transformation or physical healing, what have you.
Right. And so for your movie, The Sacred Science, it was 8 people, right, down to the Amazon who were all struggling with their own problems from a health perspective, who hadn't had much success with Western medicine, and all of a sudden they're thrown into the Amazon jungle in seclusion. How did that turn out? How did they respond to that sort of experience?
Well, so this isn't giving away too much because we say this in the beginning of the film, but 5 of them came back with real results, really substantial healing results. 2 of them came back disappointed, but spiritually transformed, and 1 person doesn't come back. Period. Yeah. And people are like, oh, does he stay down there? And that's not. This person does not come back. They died down there.
Yeah.
So there's a whole kind of intrigue around that, and it opens up a really great conversation that would be hard to have otherwise in the film. But
right.
Just to be clear, this person went down with a really terminal situation where they only had a few weeks left to live.
Right.
And they chose to be down there when they passed away. So, but yeah, 5 people came back with real results, and they were not the people that we had expected would come back with real results. I mean, going down there, they were like, we had 400 applications right off the bat for people who, we put out the call to a bunch of our communities from the other movies, and we had 400 applicants from all around the world with varying illnesses, that really wanted to go down to the jungle, and we had to select people based on not only on what was going, who was the most jungle friendly and outdoorsy, but who might actually go through a transformation because they weren't, who actually think, who might not be so jungle friendly, but would be really helped by going through that experience and facing their fears. But the people who were really who seemed really outdoorsy were the ones that it turned out to have the hardest time, because they came down to thinking that they knew what the heck they were getting into,
right? And
and being pretty confident. In fact, one person, before we even told him, that he was definitely in, he'd already bought his flights, he'd already bought all the stuff that we were going to pay for. I'm like, we're paying for all this stuff. He's like, well, I already bought it all. I'll meet you there. And I'm like, wow. This person was, if you watch the movie, you'll see that this man who has prostate cancer goes through all kinds of struggles because he has a lot of ego, and so, yeah, the people who got the big results were not necessarily the ones that we thought were going to do as well. And the people we thought were no-brainers, a lot of them had a really, really hard time.
Yeah. So I was very fortunate to be raised by my mother, an herbalist, holistic. She's into holistic medicine, alternative health, and a lot of that actually comes from me getting so sick as a kid and Western medicine not helping. But for the benefit of people who don't really know or have a background in plant medicine, spirit medicine, what exactly does that mean? What are they doing down there to heal people?
So down in the Amazon, I guess there's, looking at it from from 2 different perspectives, I guess, the sacred and the science, the Western, or the more spiritual, and the Western medicine. From a Western medical perspective, there's over 65,000 species of plants in the Amazon jungle. I mean, that number is growing every year. That's a very conservative number. Some of the ethnobotanists that I speak with think that is far more than that. Yeah. But conservatively, 65,000 species of plants in the jungle. Of those, less than 3%, and that's conservative, a lot of them say less than 1%, but less than 3% have been studied.
It's amazing.
Of the ones that have been studied, 25% of the cures that we know 25% of the treatments that we're using in cancer to treat cancer are synthesized from those plants.
Right.
So that's just cancer. Like, there's all kinds of incredible medicine that's come from that 3% that's been studied, but again, only 3% of it's been studied. 97% remains a complete mystery, and it's dwindling. I mean, every year some ridiculous amount of rainforest is being destroyed.
Right.
So, from a Western medical perspective, there's a lot of opportunity in that area, just strictly based on the plants that are down there. From a more spiritual perspective, the way that healing happens down there is unlike what you see here in the Western world, in that it's not a quick fix. There's not a magic pill. Yes, you're being prescribed 5 or 6 different herbs, in addition to ceremonies that you're doing, which are much more of a spiritual intervention. They're meant to purge not only the actual stuff that might be in your body, but they're meant to get yourself out of your own way. So that the herbs that are much more subtle, like, there's no wonder herb in the world that I know of that you can just take a magical herb and it's going to heal your whatever you're suffering from in an instant. The herbs are subtle. So with the shamans that I work with, the approach is to create an environmental condition, both through where you're actually living. All of our patients lived in a remote jungle hut that's very, very, very deep in the woods, that are that you don't have,
just crawling up the walls.
Yeah. And you don't have contact with anyone besides the shamans and whoever might be bringing you your food in the morning and night, who doesn't speak Spanish, probably speaks some form of Quechua. So even if you speak Spanish, you can't talk to him. Wow. You've got no contact with the Western world. You can't have anything in the hut. You can't bring any books. You can't bring anything, even in their spiritual books that you think are a no-brainer for the healing hut. I'll check them at the front door, and you can't go in there with them. So environmental factors are going to push you to your edge, and not like push you to your edge and like make you uncomfortable for the entire time, but are going to make you have to tune into yourself and listen to the voices that are going on in your brain while you're sitting there in nature. trying to just be for 30 days, 30 to 60 days. Not only are you doing that, you're also going into ceremony once or twice a week. And the ceremonies can be an ayahuasca ceremony. It can be a coca ceremony. It can be a ceremony where you're sitting there holding space that involves no plant medicine. But these ceremonies are all also meant to help you go inward and check in with the thing inside of you that is at your very core, that needs to be in alignment with your body in order for your body to heal. So from a spiritual perspective, you're doing all kinds of ceremony and rites of passage to sort of clear the cobwebs, clear the blocks that might be preventing your body from healing. One of the shamans that I'm nearest and dearest to, I guess, his big breakthrough for me, which is probably the most important piece of wisdom I took from the Amazon, is people have this idea that shamans heal us. He's like, but shamans don't heal us. Shamans clear the blocks that we have that are preventing us from healing ourselves.
Yeah.
And yeah, the herbs can help you heal, and maybe in a more Western way. If you're out of your own way, then the herbs actually do have their own powers and ability and properties that can help you heal from the particular thing you're working with. But these shamans would say that the majority of what they do is, the fundamental thing that they can do for you is more on the ritual and ceremonial side of things. And yes, they also live by this amazing pharmacopoeia of like natural plants. So yes, we should also be delving into those things. And they're the only ones who know what those plants do, which is why ethnobotanists have been coming there for the last 30 or 40 years and trying to extract that information. Some people who actually do it in the proper way where they're giving back, and some people who do it just because they want to make a name for themselves and then they disappear.
Right.
So they have a lot of tools, and this is also why we decided to go down to the Amazon to shoot this. Is okay, cool. So they're shamans, they have amazing ceremonies, and they also have this extremely amazing tool chest right in their backyard of herbs they can use to help you.
And they have such a beautiful way of looking at disease where it's basically a teacher, right? If there's a problem with you that's manifesting in your body, this is something that you need to deal with and is probably a side effect of something in your head, your soul, your spirit. What can you explain that a little bit to people who haven't experienced that perspective at all? It can be new for a lot of people coming from the Western world to hear the way that they think about disease.
Yeah, it's so I'm a student of all this. So this is the way I always say to myself and when I'm writing my articles, and to people who I know this stuff only as well as a human being can understand it. But there's a saying in the jungle, that in the tribes that we work with, it's actually pretty common amongst all of them. They view diseases as mothers, which is a really interesting a way to look at disease. Whereas when you get a disease, a mother becomes pregnant with you. The disease itself is sort of this motherly energy that is there to teach you something, and so it becomes pregnant with you, and it has all kinds of lessons to teach you inside the womb while you're working through that disease. All the things all the challenges that disease might present, all the fears that might conjure up, all the things that this might be pointing to, and blind spots it might be alluding to, where you've sort of somehow not been addressing things that have been underlying elements of your life that are unhealthy or toxic. So if you and in their opinion, if you acknowledge those things and you look at this thing as a teacher, a mother or a teacher, and you look at those lessons that are being presented to you, then the mother will rebirth you into this life healthy. So ultimately, if you've learned all the lessons, you'll come to full term, and the disease will rebirth you as a healthy person with that much more wisdom, having gone through it. If you don't learn those lessons, then the mother will oftentimes rebirth you into the next life or into the afterlife, and that's fine too. Like, they don't look at it like this is all, there's good or bad. They look at it like, well, there's this or there's this, and this is what's going to happen here. This is an opportunity for wisdom, or it's an opportunity to be rebirthed somewhere else and get another shot, maybe at finding that wisdom in some other way, in some other life, some other dimension. I personally, for me, like this resonates with me on a deep level, because I had severe migraines growing up, and they just got worse and worse getting into my early 20s. And it wasn't until I didn't use shamanism, but I used a couple different interventions that really forced me to look at the underlying trauma that was bringing these things about. And it was painful. but it was a huge relief when I actually addressed the shadows, that were lurking behind the scenes, contributing to this illness. Once I did, migraines went away completely. So for me, like a lot of this stuff, some people are like, but are you sure this is true? And I'm like, for me, like, I guess I have the luxury, if there is one, of having dealt with stuff in a similar way in my life. So when they say it, I'm like, oh wow, finally there are people who are validating the thing I had to go through to get better. So for me, I'm already a believer. So I get to, it sort of passes my litmus test. Obviously, we still work with real patients so that this can be worked. This can be tried out in real time on people who have real problems. But for me, it wasn't a barrier to entry that this philosophy existed down there. In fact, it really validated something I had already experienced in my own life.
Yeah, and I can vouch for that as well. I kind of went through a similar experience, and we can talk about that in a second. But I think one thing that's so important to realize about all of this is there's a state of reverence, or there's an appreciation for reverence, especially as it relates to plants, that I certainly noticed immediately when I went down there with Allison, that I think a lot of people, especially raised in the Western world, aren't used to. So let's start with an example like tobacco. Down there, especially, very sacred plant. There's the idea that the plant has its own spirit, its own intelligence, and it's not always good or bad. It can kind of go back and forth, and a lot of that can depend on how reverent you are. So if you're in America and you're smoking a cigarette, a lot of the time you're on your phone, or you're in a car, or doing so, you're just kind of smoking a cigarette, and it's going to give you cancer and you're going to die. Whether it's the tobacco or all of the other stuff that's in there is another discussion altogether. But down there, tobacco is a sacred plant that is often part of ceremony. And you could be drinking, you could be smoking, it could be, rapé, where it's basically, someone else snuffs it into your nose to clear energy before something else happens. Can you help explain the difference between, or I guess the depth of the appreciation for plants down there as opposed to the idea that there are drugs in Western medicine, right?
Yeah. So I think it has to do, and this is in my experience, it feels like having an ear and an eye for subtlety, which I think these cultures do. Here we look at plants, I guess. If you want to look at, tobacco is a great example. It's something that is used unconsciously. It's something that we use because we like the head buzz it gives us, and we like to consume more and more of the thing that we feel makes us feel good. Whereas down there, there's this feeling of appreciation for the subtle notes. They call it, the spirit of a plant. So, somebody who works a tobacco shaman, a mapacho is, the jungle tobacco. It's actually, we were in the Mapacho River Valley a few weeks ago, which is where, this valley is filled with this amazing wild growing tobacco. Wow. It's not used casually. This isn't a casual thing. You don't see people just kind of smoking packs and packs of mapacho. It's used in ceremony. And it's something that I think is largely lost. That term ceremony in our culture is really not something that exists. We look at ceremony as maybe two things that happen in your life. You turn 21 and you can go to the bar and get absolutely hammered with your friends. And maybe you get married at some point. Maybe you have a confirmation before that when you're 12, but you're probably not even paying attention to what's going on there. You're just kind of going through the motions so you can get home and play video games or something like that. Sure. So we've lost this concept of ceremony. And when a tobacco shaman, because there are such things, is working with tobacco, he's sitting there in ceremony, oftentimes with a patient he's trying to get a read on, doing very specific things with that tobacco, and not chain smoking, but just using a little bit because he knows there's subtlety to it that can only be tapped into if you use it in conjunction with the right energy, the right intention, in the right setting. So there's an attention to that subtlety that really draws me into these cultures. These days when I work with, before I went down there, I'd work with herbs and I would just kind of try to put them all into a blender and, oh, this is good for me, that's good for me, that's good for me. I'm gonna blend it up, I'm gonna chug it, then I'm gonna go about my day. Yeah. Whereas now, I find myself, I was on a hike with my dad today here in Connecticut, and I was like, oh, this is a beautiful place. I'm gonna take my shoes off. He's like, what? I'm like, I'm gonna take my shoes off. I'm gonna do the rest of the hike on. He's like, what are you talking about? I'm like, it's amazing. Do it. You just take your shoes off and walk on this path in the forest, and you're gonna feel something. because it's not, this rubber-souled kind of a culture that doesn't really want to experience and they have this direct experience with the natural world around us. I think is at the heart of a lot of the disease that we're experiencing. Yeah. Whereas down there, people just spend so much time in nature and they know how to listen to it. And when they're ingesting a plant, when they're smoking a plant, it's not something that's being done unconsciously. It's being done very, very consciously with an ear to the ground, so to speak, and really experiencing some of the subtleties that those plants have to offer. You can call them a plant spirit. Down there, these subtleties might be referred to as a plant spirit, or you can just look at them as being these subtle aspects of an organism that can only be experienced when you're giving it your full consciousness. And that's something that I've experienced again and again in that culture. And it's something that's really helped me in my life, just to slow down with everything and just really make sure I'm understanding, I'm seeing with true sight, clear sight, what's in front of me.
Yeah.
So
one thing that I noticed down there is if you take those plants, those medicines, what have you, and you put them in a pill and bring them back here, it's kind of missing the point, right? There's this whole side of that appreciation for life and for knowledge and for ancient tradition and ceremony that we've kind of missed out on because we're looking for that pill that's going to just do everything automatically. But we have this huge problem, and I'm going to try to explain this in a left brain way, even though it's kind of a right brain thing, with Western medicine and our world of trying to treat people, where we basically have this thing called the placebo effect. And we don't really know why it's there, but like 30% of the time ish, you take something that has no value to your body, could be a sugar pill or whatever, and 30% of the time it'll work. And it might even work better than something that is powerful medicine. No one really knows why or what to do with it, but you just have to beat the placebo effect in order for a drug to be effective. But when you go down there and you start to experience some of the various ceremonies, or even if you pick some wild sage, for instance, the way you're supposed to do it, and maybe you can explain this in a bit more detail, is you ask the plant for permission, you open a dialogue. And this sounds super woo-woo, but I think if you go through the different steps that they have kind of entrenched in their society and tradition and culture, when you go through that, it's definitely honing your attention, and I would assume amplifying what we call the placebo effect, right? Down there, they might explain it in a different way. But I think there's something so powerful about the idea of taking a step back and seeing where not only our food comes from, but our medicines, our traditions, like the reasons that tobacco might, hurt us here, but be used to heal down there. There's something different that they're doing. And also, there's a really important aspect of all of this where, I've done several ayahuasca ceremonies in a relatively traditional way. And I know you share a similar sentiment. It's not play, it's work most of the time. And a lot of people who have talked about that, I always want to do this stuff. I want to do plant medicine. But this is some of the hardest spiritual or personal development type work you'll ever do, because all of those things, like you mentioned the ego before, the things that are under the radar that have been bothering you without you knowing it for a very long time, you're going to have to deal with that.
Absolutely.
So what did you see when you're doing this with a group of people, their first time in a ceremony? How did that change them?
I think that a lot of people who went into this felt like they were going, and this is like it was for me, I felt like I was going to be able to maintain, I guess, for lack of a better word, maintain a certain level of comfort, of focus and poise in an ayahuasca ceremony, and that doesn't happen. I mean, I guess
there's no decorum.
There is no decorum. It's funny. I was so our patients. I want to stay on topic here. I have a story to share after this. Our people were. It was like Operation Shock and Awe, spiritual shock and awe. Like people go into an ayahuasca ceremony, and they're like, "Oh, this is gonna be great. I've heard about this. It feels like it's gonna be extremely, transformative and enlightening." And for most of them, I guess after it's all over, there is a serious degree of transformation, but you have to pay to play. I always say that to people. I'm like, listen, you don't have to pay to play. If you want to do this, if you want to have those kinds of openings, this is not a joyride. It just isn't. And for people, and for the people that have it easy, some people actually can take ayahuasca, and just because of their chemistry, potentially it's also something deeper in their essence, they can coast through an ayahuasca ceremony. I know many, particularly women, and I have my own theories about why that is, but particularly women sometimes can just have the most joyous of experiences, and it's enlightening to a degree, but there isn't much suffering and there isn't much shadow work. Whereas with other plants, they have to deal with it in those ceremonies, where some people, the same people who might suffer in an ayahuasca ceremony might not suffer in like a San Pedro ceremony. But I would say the suffering is all part of the work. It's all part of the gift. And the people that I saw suffering the most and having the layers of their onion peeled, during that night, were people you would see a corresponding acceleration in their personal and physical healing process in the weeks to come. You just saw when they went through those experiences and they really got a good dose of medicine and went through and processed some of the shadows and saw for a second what's really at their essence, because we tend to not see what's at our essence for very long. It's just our body has this amazing mechanism of just covering it back up. It's like wrapping it all up, but just getting enough of a glimpse at their essence where they could remember that that's there and just use that as their guiding light. We saw in those people a serious shift in their mental, emotional, physical elements in the weeks that came pretty soon after. I just want to say, people I think feel as though shamans and people like you and I who've been in a number of ayahuasca ceremonies, that it gets easier. It doesn't get easier. That's not the medicine. That's not the nature of the medicine. The medicine, if that was the nature of the medicine, then there would be an inherent flaw in the medicine. The medicine is not there to kind of become a predictable thing for you to kind of get good at and start using recreationally. It just doesn't work that way. I was in an ayahuasca ceremony in the middle of nowhere on the border of the Andes Mountains in the Amazon 3 weeks ago, and I was in my tent. There was like a 4-hour period where we all kind of hung out to meditate, quote unquote, before the ceremony started, and I was sitting there and I'm like, really, at least I was conscious enough to sort of be slightly amused by how scared I was, but I was like, you are really afraid right now. Like this is, like I was thinking about my kids, I was thinking about my wife, and I was like, all these things you might do before, like when you're on one of those carrier boats, like about to unload you on the beaches of Normandy before like World War, before the Battle of Normandy and World War, like just kind of saying your final sort of like getting your things in order, like just thinking about how much you love your people, and then like you go into this ceremony and like it's called ayahuasca, it's Quechua, and ayahuasca, 2 words. Huasca means vine or rope. Aya means spirit or death. In these cultures, spirit and death are sort of, death is not a feared thing. So death and spirit are sort of the same. Right. So you're going to ingest this potion, that is called quite literally, the vine of death or the vine of soul. And it isn't like you can go into that spirit world and keep all these things that you have. You can't take it with you. So it's a very painful process that for those first couple times, letting all the things that you think you are and all the things that you think make you and all the material things and all the the people that and going and just shedding yourself of that and walking into this tunnel all alone and leaving all that behind is a scary thing. But first of all, everyone comes back. This thing is like, this is not a dangerous plant to ingest. There have been some people who have had a hard time on it, but usually it involved, them taking it in conjunction with something else really dangerous. For the most part, this is a teacher plant, which a lot of people don't get, because it seems like this should be like the biggest power plant in the world when you take it, because it just is so intense. But it's a teacher plant, which means it's not, and this is shamanic, jargon for our, lingo, that they use to refer to certain kinds of plants. This plant has a built-in ally. It's a built-in teacher that will not let you go too far and will always bring you back home, even if you feel like you're seeing things that are pretty intense. You'll always be able to come back. Whereas there are other plants in the jungle that are not like that. And tobacco actually is considered a power plant that's not like that, where you can go too far off the deep end and lose your way and die, which could be smoking it over consumption. But ayahuasca is an amazing teacher plant that is extremely strong medicine that I feel can give people a pretty powerful peek at who they actually are.
Yeah, and even just going through one of those ceremonies is such a unique event for someone who's raised in our culture, where I feel like we only got half of it, right? Like, especially when you start traveling the world, you feel like you missed so much of the point, and the pleasure of pain, almost the pleasure of the process, right? The pleasure of putting all of your attention in one place, no distractions, nothing else around there. You got to deal with this right now, and we're here to help. And we've been through it before as well, right? That it's such a cool thing to be at your probably. I'd say that I was at my most vulnerable in my life, or top 5 or top 3, whatever. And when everyone is going through that together, man, isn't that exactly what most of us need in America or in the Western world? I think so.
There's this feeling of community that I don't forget about it, but it's one of those things because when you go a lot of times the things you remember most about an ayahuasca ceremony are maybe the big things you had to face in the middle of the night. But there's this feeling of community when you're sitting there in a circle of people, men and women of all ages, obviously over 18 at least. But you sit there and at first, I remember the first ceremony I was in, I was very self-conscious. I was like, I don't want to go through scary things and like break down and cry and potentially throw up, in front of these people. I don't know who they are. And like after the ceremony starts, maybe the first hour in when people start really going through it. And maybe for me, it was after I was one of the first people to throw up in the first time I did an ayahuasca ceremony. And I was just so resistant. I didn't want to be embarrassed. I didn't want to be humiliated. I didn't want people to judge me. And I did it. And as I threw up this huge, and I don't know if it's too graphic for this program, but threw up into the bucket. And like, I'm like, this is a part of the ayahuasca. They call it la purga because you're purging. So a lot of times you throw up. It's a very normal part of the process. And you're also supposedly, and I very much believe this, you're purging out negative energies. You're purging out blocks that you've had for a very long time. But as I purged, I was like, there was this collective groan that went around like the circle, like not like almost like feeling everything I was doing. And as you're in the middle of these ceremonies, you become sort of like this organism. The circle becomes its own organism where if somebody's going through it on the opposite side of a large room, everybody knows that person's going through it. And there's this like feeling of like love and support going around the circle to that person. And it might seem woo, but once you're in the circle and you're actually experiencing it firsthand, it becomes very real, and it becomes the implications of that in worldwide consciousness, in the way we go through our days and our everyday life, of just this ability for human beings when they really come together and share this vulnerability to support each other in ways that could never be expressed in words. Like that is an amazing gift just to experience in and of itself, let alone all the things that you're going through on your own in the ceremony.
Yeah, and it seems to me that this is getting worse and worse. I had my friend Dallas Hartwig on the show recently, and he's been talking about this, how especially with technology kind of connecting us more and more, the world is getting bigger. We're no longer at that Dunbar's number of tribes, right? We don't have like 100 people in our tribe who we know our entire lives, who we can connect with, and we're missing that. Well, I think that's one of the main contributors to the fact that we're all lonely, sad, sick, depressed, whatever you want to call it. And in other parts of the world, when you do find these tiny little places, every once in a while you get a taste for what they've had all along, what we should have had our entire lives as well. And you see that in that vulnerability, in that place of pain, for one person, you can be the strength and support for someone else. And all of a sudden, it's impossible to be sad when you're in a situation like that. So what do you think we can learn as a society, or as individuals in a society here, from the ancient traditions there that really focus on getting people close and intimate, in a very unique way?
I just feel like it goes back to the village. I have a son now, and he's 3.5 years old, and realizing very clearly. Say again.
Your teacher.
Yeah, he's totally my teacher. But I'm just realizing more now than ever that it's became very clear to me the combination of having my own child and seeing these cultures where everyone lives together. You don't ship your parents off to Florida, and trust your kids to take care of themselves while you're away at work. So basically, no one has anyone because everybody's isolated. I mean, we're in a culture of isolation, and it's becoming more and more isolated. Whereas down there, everyone is in the same community. Your parents live either in the same house or they live in the same little village, and that is not looked at as a bad thing. In fact, these people are the
Hmm.
happiest people that I've ever met. These people are,
Yeah.
they might not have as much money, they might not have iPods or iPads, and iPhones and things like that, but they are so connected to each other. They all know everything about each other. They know more. We know. My friends know more about. And I'm throwing my friends from college under the bus here, but my friends from college know more about their favorite sports team than they know about their extended family. They could tell you the
Yeah.
stats on the third string, quarterback for the New York Giants, and they could tell you about their
Right.
niece or nephew. There's something inherently wrong with that. There's something that's so obviously unhealthy. I mean, if you want to look at, some really obvious places to start kind of like, or some pretty obvious smoking guns right now in our society are
Hmm.
things like that, where we've spent so much time figuring out things outside of the things that matter most to us, that we're sort of now in this phase of being lost, and we're kind of scratching at, grabbing for, like, our favorite series on Netflix, and the substance of our choice, and anything we could possibly do to distract ourselves from the fact that we are not leading very wholesome lives. We're not leading lives
Yeah.
that are connected to the people that we love, and everyone's paying the price for that. So yeah, a big lesson from being in the jungle is, how do I get family closer, and how do I get rid of this belief that success means that I live in this house up on a hill with a fence around it, and have my parents down in a home in Florida that's really nice, and have my kid in some
Yeah.
fancy school never seeing me, and have a 3-car garage. Like, success to me is becoming a lot more simple, but at the same time it's becoming more simple, it's becoming more complex, because to actually get to know these people and bring them in, it requires a whole new level of communication and heart and open-heartedness than I've ever had to work with before in my life. So when you bring your family
Yeah.
closer, you start having to go through all kinds of things that you've been keeping in the corner, in a dark corner of your consciousness, and those trials one by one are really healing for you. So I'm not sure if that answers your question. I'm just sort of agreeing with what you said. Like, I think
Yeah.
that we need to get closer, and I think that this illusion of separation being the goal. I mean, every major meditation, every major religion, looks at the idea of separation as being exactly the wrong direction. But in our
Yeah.
society, our goal really is leading us to increasing separation. Whereas, yeah.
Right.
So I think that it's a problem.
Yeah. And so I was on your blog recently on thesacredscience.com, which is a great blog, by the way.
Thank you.
Nick is an excellent writer. And you described when you were just in Peru, and I think you were getting in. It was about to you were about to lose the light. You had like a 2-hour hike down into the place where you were going, and it was a scramble and really technical and dangerous all of a sudden. And you had kind of this like shift, right? That I think most of us experience when we go down there, or we go to a place that's completely outside of our comfort zone. And I'm just going to read your mantra that you told yourself as you had a slip and you were about to fall off a cliff. You
Oh boy.
said, "One step at a time, eyes on the path, not on the edge. My breath is my friend, trust in nature." What happened after you started saying that to yourself?
Man, I was like, I've got goosebumps just thinking about it right now. Uh, I was scared. So the thing is, I tend to put myself in life-threatening situations, which my parents absolutely hate. My dad read that blog, and he's like,
Yeah.
I'm never reading your blogs anymore, because I'm sick of seeing all these things that you do that are dangerous. But I tend to find myself in situations, especially when you're in a developing country like that. And you're
Right.
off in the fringe. You put yourself in situations that are sometimes, there is no safety net. So I think that there was this feeling as we're sort of running down this Incan trail to get to this valley. It was like a 4,000 foot descent. There was this feeling that is like a familiar feeling of, remember this, you're getting yourself into another one of these situations where, like, this is dangerous, and so there's a different
Yeah.
mentality that kind of comes into play there, where my first response was to cling, to kind of like cling and tense up and get very defensive. But we couldn't really get too defensive, because it was getting darker and darker as we're descending this trail, and so I didn't have a choice, because if the darker it got, the more dangerous it got. The faster I went, the more dangerous it got. So I had to kind of choose one. So I started saying that mantra, eyes on the path, not on the edge, one step at a time, your breath is your friend, trust in nature. And as I did that, it started becoming easier to go faster and feel more in control. And that was achieving the immediate goal that I wanted, which was getting down the hill and feeling good about it. But then a subtle thing happened about 5 to 10 minutes into that mantra, and all of a sudden I realized I was looking at Roman, the shaman in front of me, running ahead with his headlamp, and I just suddenly realized I had no idea who I was. This thing, not like in a scary way, but I was just, all of a sudden I was this like prancing, gleeful little spirit, like running down the mountain.
Yeah.
You know, like I was no longer Nick who had an agenda to be here, to get to be in a ceremony tomorrow and get down to the center before dark. All of a sudden it was like everything was perfect. This was perfect. My body was moving exactly how it's built to move down this trail. There were a couple little times where a rock would come out and I'd kick it and kind of have to, like, you know, slightly just kind of grab onto the side of the trail or do something to kind of counter it. But it wasn't fearful. It was like your body knows exactly what it needs to do. It's built for this. And, you know, it gave my spirit, or the essence that we were talking about of who I am, the ability to just really thrive and be joyful in this experience, as opposed to being so tensed up and defensive. And so, yeah, I got down to the bottom of the hill. Finally, we got down to where we were supposed to be. And I told Roman about it. I'm like, man, that descent was medicine in and of itself. And he laughed. He's like, yeah, a lot of people say that you know, going down that Incan trail right there is a really medicinal experience. I'm like, no, you don't understand. I didn't know who I was going down that hill, and it was one of the best experiences of my life. And he's like, yeah, that's what we hear. That's the kind of, that, you know, I'm glad to see that you're already getting some medicine from this valley. It's a really medicinal valley. You know, people have been coming here for thousands of years to heal. So I'm happy that it's working for you. And I'm like, no, but I don't think I kept on trying to rationalize it. Yeah. And be like, no, but this isn't like make believe. You know, almost insinuating that, like, you know, a lot of the legend that happens around these parts is sort of like this kind of like really romantic, you know, charming way of, you know, creating some mythology around something that's completely not real. Right. And the more, which speaks to another quick point, which is most of the mythologies that I went into this thinking were really charming have turned out to be true in a lot of ways. Like, you know, you hear people talking about these things, go, oh yeah, that valley over there, it does this or it does that. And then you experience it firsthand and you almost discard it. And then you're like, wait a second, but that's what they all say this thing does. And wow, this must be an amazing place. There must be some power to this location. So yeah, that mantra really got me through. And it's something that I think is applicable to your entire life. I mean, we're all walking on an edge. We're all walking down a trail. A lot of times it gets dangerous. Sometimes we forget to breathe. Sometimes we pay attention more to what's happening on the edge or the cliff or the dangers or the potential failures, as opposed to just being right on the path, looking at our steps, making sure that we're taking it one step at a time and being in the moment, which, you know, again, this is not just specific to Amazonian shamanism. You know, this is specific to, you know, to Buddhism, to Hinduism. I mean, this could be seen in a lot of different, religions and traditions around the world. This is just the fundamental of who the heck we actually are as human beings.
Right. You don't have time for your ego when you're dangling off a cliff.
No. And I got to tell you, it helped me in ceremony the next night. You know, I was like, you know what? This is the same thing. Just go walk in. Don't think about what's going to happen. Don't think about what might come up. Don't think about what you could be doing instead of doing this. You know, this is where you are, just one step at a time, one breath at a time, for sure, in ayahuasca ceremony. One breath at a time. And honestly, in any ceremony like that, for me, one breath at a time. Don't think about when it's going to end. Just be in the present moment, and you'll be all right.
And I love that you brought up, too, when you're talking to the shaman who lives there, right? Lives in this whole what we would call a woo-woo space, and you're just like, no, but really, I wasn't me. I was the valley. And they're like, yeah, that's what happens to everyone here. You know, I've gone through that so many different times, and it's hilarious because down there is a whole different psychology about how the world works, what spirit is, who you are, who you aren't, and how all this works. And it's so funny I'm sure for them to see us come down there into their neck of the woods and kind of like babies go through that spiritual experience that nature really gives you. And you don't have to go to the Amazon to experience that. It's really more of a mindset. And since they do it so often and they have so much tradition in helping others do that, it's easier to kind of have that guidance down there. But I think once you do go through something like that, you can really bring it back and just go out for a hike with your family and go through a fundamentally different experience than you would have growing up, or, you know, before you went down and really challenged yourself in the mountains of Peru.
Yeah, there's something that's really been potent for me in returning from these jungle trips. It's that I can tell what's real and what's not real. I can tell, there's more of you have a little bit more of a sense for what's actually happening around you and what are your own projections and your own shadows and your own fears coming up. And right. I'm sure for a lot of people have that. You don't need to go down to the jungle to do that. But for me on my path, that's been a huge takeaway where, I'll be in a situation and, it'll even a social situation, and I'll be like, feeling some kind of tension, and instead of ignoring the tension or tucking it away, something that ceremonies, whether again ayahuasca or any of the other ceremonies that exist, teach you is to look at that tension and to be curious about it, but not be afraid of it. Don't fear the fear. And so once you start when you start getting curious about these little tensions in your body, these little things that are happening around you in your environment, they start becoming very conspicuous, and you're like, wow, interesting. Why are you there? You're not helping me at all right now.
Right.
That's not helping me be in my thriving state where I, my barefoot on a forest trail kind of a state. That's not helping me be in that state. So, okay, you start, in a very polite way saying farewell to things that aren't serving you anymore, because you know that you don't really want those things sticking to you, because at some point you'll be in a rite of passage sometime that year where you don't want to have that garbage in your consciousness when things get even more intense. So it's like, okay, well, if this is happening now and I'm talking to somebody in the grocery store, then I'd rather just say farewell to you now, and we'll part ways here. So it's been really instructive for me to help me see through a lot of the BS that sort of kind of comes across, the ticker tape of our consciousness here in the Western world.
Right. One of the biggest things that kind of dovetails with all of this is that I brought back is the feeling of gratitude, not in the sense where you have a gratitude journal or you say you're thankful for things every morning, because I think both of those things are excellent too, but that's very much a Western way of doing it. It's the sense that a lot of people I met in Peru would basically be saying grace for everything that they did. So like if you're drinking water, you're thanking the water before you drink it. Before you pick a plant, anything that you're doing. Is there a way you think that people can work that into their own daily lives here? Because it seems our lives here, especially if you're used to it, they seem so unremarkable. And we're fortunate enough to go down to the jungle in the Amazon and experience some things that are truly remarkable, at least to us. What can they bring back? What that feeling of gratitude or something else that you learned down there? What would you like to share with others?
I feel as though there's a reason to be grateful. I don't want to say every moment of your life, because that seems unreasonable, but there's a reason to be grateful for a lot of different things that happen in your day. And people might say that this is sort of like a really quaint little tradition that the Peruvians have to kind of say thank you for the glass of water, say thank you for the plant before they pick it. But in my experience, the people who do that tend to be leading pretty healthy and happy lives. I think it's probably a combination of things. I would just say that there's our society has built-in moments and opportunities to give gratitude. I mean, my son now has this whole list of things that we say at the dinner table, that he's thankful for, and I don't think it needs to be anything very special or anything very fancy. He just goes through every night before he eats dinner, and every night before he goes to bed, he has this list of all the things he's grateful for, and he does it every single night, and he loves the way it makes him feel. Sometimes some of these things are really hard to explain scientifically.
Right.
There are people who scientists have tried to sort of debunk or prove the power of gratitude, and I think that there isn't anything really concrete that proves that it has any particular effect on you. But I do think energetically, when you're giving gratitude for your life, you tend to be a happier and more well balanced human being.
Yeah.
So I don't know that these people are. Is Sebastian, the Karo shaman, who's giving gratitude for the coca he's about to offer you, is that supercharging those leaves so that you're going to heal faster? I don't know, but I do know that he's much more focused and grounded and much more conscious in that moment than somebody who's just pulling out their bag of coca and going through the motions and not really thinking about it very much. So a lot that sort of touches on a realm of of this that's really subtle, you know, and I feel as though I personally have just, I can feel it in my body when we give gratitude for things here in our family. And when you were talking about giving gratitude to saying thank you to a plant before you pick it. This is something that's been that just about every one of the people that I know in the jungle who work with plants, whether we're talking about the Amazon or whether we're talking about the jungles of Belize or the jungles of Guatemala, like this is not people. These aren't people who know each other. These are people. Right. These are the cultures have been doing this for thousands of years, and they all do it in the relatively same way. Yeah. So when I see that, and we see that across all the major world religions, why do you think we say prayers over our food before we eat them? You know. I can't tell you exactly what that's doing to your food. I'm sure there are plenty of people who would like to tell you that there are certain things it's doing to your food. Sure. I'm just saying this is something that's been happening since the dawn of human existence. Yeah. We've been praying over food. We've been praying over things that we're about to ingest. Right. You know, when we see in an anthropological way, which is sort of is a big facet of what I do. When you see something like that is repeated throughout many different cultures that are across various continents that have nothing to do with each other, that could never have communicated, that points to something that is valid and that should be paid attention to and investigated. Yeah. So gratitude is one of those things. It's been happening for thousands of years. Yeah. And, you know, for me, it's like, you know, when you combine that with the way it makes you feel in your heart to get really, really, you know, mushy about it, like, to get the essence of who I am when I'm giving gratitude for something before I serve something to somebody else or administer an herb to a sick loved one. When I do something, it does something that I could tell is definitely not hurting it and very well might be benefiting the receiver of whatever I'm preparing. So you know, I just combine those two things: the way it makes me feel and the fact that it's been being done for so long. And it's like, you know, this is something that we need to pay attention to in the modern world. Right.
And it's funny because that starts to tinker with a little bit of like Harry Potter magic, right? Depending on how you think about all of this. But I think no matter how you define it, you know, if you want to say taking a deep breath and saying grace to yourself engages the parasympathetic so you can calm down and eat more mindfully, that's great. But there are so many different ways. And I think that it's wonderful that you're going down to all these different places in the world and bringing back these ancient traditions and this ancient knowledge and intelligence that so many of us are missing and not really aware of. So we're just about out of time, but before we go, why don't you tell folks where they can find you and what you're working on next?
Cool. Yeah. So thank you first of all for having me, man. This has been an honor. And so you can find us at thesacredscience.com. If you want to check out a free screening of The Sacred Science, you can do thesacredscience.com/free_screening, and that'll take you to our free screening page. What we're working on next. Well, so I'm writing a book, which is exciting. I'm excited about that. It's been a pretty joyous process to do that. So that's coming out in 2018. So we've got a little time for that. Right now, we're creating a pretty awesome course on energy medicine, where we're investigating the sacred roots of energy medicine from around the world, and have amazing teachers coming in to show us these forgotten techniques and how to heal yourself using various practices that involve your energy or your chi. Wow. So that's a pretty exciting thing. And we're also, the next film we're preparing for is going to be pretty crazy. We're going to be going to Siberia and Mongolia, which is where, you know, the roots, the term shamanism comes from. The term shaman comes from a Mongolian dialect. And it's a very sacred landscape that have some of the world's most mysterious and understudied tribes. So we'll be going on a pretty interesting expedition into the wild forests and outback of Mongolia and Siberia, trying to stay alive yet again. My father will be excited about that.
You always make it back.
I always make it back. So that'll be happening. We'll be starting to break ground on that in 2017. And pretty excited about that. I know that a lot of people in the sacred science community can't wait for that one to happen, because, you know, this is just this knowledge exists all around the world, and our mission really is to work with these cultures in a very respectful way, so that they get the respect that they deserve. These cultures tend to be living in areas of the world that are being exploited for their natural resources, and they're in danger of being wiped off the face of the map. So we are trying to work with them and bring back knowledge that can help people here in the Western world that need that knowledge, while at the same time supporting them and bringing the world's attention to the importance of preserving the culture and the landscapes that they live on. So Project in Siberia we're really excited about, and we have a bunch of other little courses and fun things that we're creating along the way.
Very cool. Well, if you haven't seen it yet, check out thesacredscience.com as well as the documentary. Fantastic. Really, it touched me. And I teared up on a number of occasions watching that movie. It's powerful, powerful stuff. So if you're interested in anything we've been talking about today, check out Nick's movie and blog. You're awesome, man. Thank you so much for coming on. This has been a long time coming, and I'd love to have you on again soon.
Absolutely. Thanks, Abel. Can't wait.
Thanks again for listening to Fat Burning Man. Don't forget, before you go, check out fatburningtribe.com. If you have a question for me that you want answered about how to improve your performance, what to eat for dinner, how to drop fat quickly, how to improve your overall health, or anything else, we answer all of your questions there. So quickly, you can get the first month for just $1 for a limited time. Check it out at fatburningtribe.com. All right, I'll see you there. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Fat Burning Man. If you liked it, don't forget to hit the subscribe button on iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, the podcast app, or wherever else you might be listening to or watching this show. Got a second? Please leave me a quick review on iTunes. I always love hearing from you, and if you think someone else might like and benefit from this free show, please take a second to share it with a friend or with a family member. You can get in touch with me on Twitter at FatBurnMan and Facebook by typing in Abel James or Fat Burning Man. Drop me a line anytime. Did you know that I've recorded over 150 episodes of Fat Burning Man, winning 4 awards in independent media and hitting #1 in more than 8 countries? And here's some more good news. You can download and listen to every single episode for free. All you have to do is type in fatburningman.com. I'll give you a second to type it in, fatburningman.com. And you'll get all the show notes in video and audio versions for all the past episodes of Fat Burning Man. Better yet, enter your best email at fatburningman.com, sign up for my newsletter, and I'll even send you a quick start guide to start burning fat right now and a few of our ridiculously tasty recipes as a special thanks for signing up. Once again, just go to fatburningman.com right now, enter your best email to get your free fat burning download straight to your inbox, and make sure that you never miss a show again. This is Abel James signing off. Thanks so much for listening, and have a great week.
Myself, and I love the people around me, and I know that if I can do these things better, if my body's healthier, if my mind is healthier, if I'm emotionally more stable, all of these things, if I'm better at these things, the people around me